Okay, we're going to solve some more quadratic equations. This type, now, we have the quadratic term, which is the x squared term. We have the x term, and we have it equal to 0. So there is really no constant attached to this. So this is the type of quadratic equation we're solving. It's some number squared plus another number is equal to 0. So this is kind of the form of equation that we're going to be solving in this video. Okay, so what I want to do here is find the value of x that makes this statement true. I could probably guess and check, but a way that has been developed that works pretty well is to factor this into something times something else. So this is I could take an x out of both of these terms, so it's kind of undistributing, right? Undistributing is what factoring is. So I'm going to take out an x from each term, so that leaves behind, let's see, x times what gives me x squared is x, and x times what gives me 2x, it is 2, right? So this is an equivalent expression to this expression right here, and it's equal to 0. Okay, now I need to teach you a new property. This property is called the zero product property. Okay, for short we call it ZPP. Okay, the zero product property says that if you have two numbers multiplied together, so like a times b is equal to 0, then the solutions to this are a could be equal to 0, or b could be equal to 0, or they're both equal to 0, right? Or a and b are 0, right? And that makes sense if you think about it. Okay, so I have two numbers multiplied together that equal 0. So if a is 0, then 0 times any number is equal to 0. Isn't that true? Or what if b was equal to 0? So I have any number, so a say it's 5, times 0 is going to be equal to 0. Or say a was 10. 10 times 0 is 0. Or say a was a million. A million times 0 is still 0. So these are two solutions. A is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. Or it could be that both are equal to 0. But we don't really worry too much about that. We just want to find values that do make it true. Okay, we don't have to know specifically what they are, but just find values that would make it true. Okay, so what we have here is really just two numbers multiplied together. This is some number, and this is some other number, right? Just like blob times blob is equal to 0. So like this is kind of like my a times my b, and it's equal to 0. So that means that this value right here could be equal to 0. So this would be a solution, right? X is equal to 0. Or this value right here could be equal to 0. So I'm just going to set this whole blob equal to 0. X plus 2 is equal to 0. So what does that mean x would be equal to? Well, what plus 2 is equal to 0? It's negative 2, right? Or I could just subtract 2 from both sides if you want to do it the long way. So x is equal to negative 2 is a solution, and x is equal to 0 is a solution. And let me just go ahead and check by plugging it back into my original equation. So if I had 0 squared plus 2 times 0, is it equal to 0? Well, yeah, it is. Or if I had negative 2 squared plus 2 times a negative 2, is that equal to 0? Well, this is negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, plus 2 times negative 2 is negative 4, and that's equal to 0. Yeah, that checks out. Okay, so those are my two solutions to this quadratic equation. Let's go ahead and do the same kind of thing with this one right here. So I'm going to factor out what is my greatest common factor between these two terms. Well, I could take an x out of both terms. That's kind of like undistributing again. I'm going to take an x out of both terms, but I could also take a 3 out of both terms, right? So I'm going to take a 3x out of both terms. So 3x times what is 3x squared? It is x, right? 3x times x is 3x squared. And 3x times what is negative 6x? Well, it's negative 2, right? Negative 2 times 3x would be negative 6x. So this is an equivalent expression to that. Okay, so now, again, I'm just going to figure out what values make this equal to 0 and this equal to 0, because those will be the solutions according to the zero product property, ZPP. So 3x could equal 0, or x minus 2 could equal 0. Okay, so this just tells me that x is equal to 0. I can divide both sides by 3, but I also just know that I can plug in 0 to make that 0. Or I could plug in what to make this 0? Well, 2 minus 2, right, would be 0. Or if I add 2 to both sides, I get x equals 2. All right. So it's always going to be the opposite of this number. So those are my two solutions. Okay, and I could plug them back in to check. So 0, obviously this one's going to make it 0. But 2, so 2 squared is 4. Let me just do it. So 2 squared is 4. 4 times 3 is 12. And then negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. And yeah, it checks out. Okay, let's just do 2 more. So this time it's not equal to 0, but I can modify this equation so that it looks like this again, right? So I just move this to the other side by subtracting 2x from both sides. And these don't combine, right? So this is just 5x squared minus 2x on this side of the equation. And 2x minus 2x is just 0. So now it looks like that type of equation that I was working with before. I just modified it a little bit. So now I factor out, let's see, looks like these don't have a common factor in the numerical term, but they do in the variable term. So I'm going to take out an x from both of them, and that will leave a 5x behind and just a minus 2, right, to make that an equivalent expression. Okay, so either this is equal to 0 or this is equal to 0, or they both are. So, oops, not a. X is equal to 0. I just wrote equals twice, that's funny. X is equal to 0, or 5x minus 2 is equal to 0. So let's add 2 to both sides. I get 5x equals 2, and then divide both sides by 5, and I get x equals 2/5. Okay, so those are my two solutions. And why not just check this one? I know 0 is going to work. But 5 times 2/5 squared, is it equal to 2 times 2/5? Okay, so 2/5 squared would be 4/25 times 5. Is that equal to 2 times 2/5? Well, 2 times 2 is just 4, so it'd be 4/5. And then 5 goes into 25 5 times, so I could divide the top and bottom by 5, and I get 4/5 is equal to 4/5. So yeah, that checks out. Okay, last one. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move that 2x to the other side by adding 2x to both sides. And I get 4x squared plus 2x is equal to 0. Factor out, let's see, a common factor of, I believe, 2x would work. And that would need to be 2x times 2x to make 4x squared. And now 2x times what is equal to 2x? Well, it's actually times 1, right? Because anything times itself, or anything times 1 is itself. So that's how that works. And now, so this term tells me that x is equal to 0. And this term tells me, let's see, you want to know the shortcut of figuring this out. It's the opposite of the back divided by the front. So it's negative 1/2. Okay? But do you want me to prove it to you? I'll go ahead and show you how it's working. So it's going to be the opposite of the front because I'm going to subtract it from both sides. And then I'm going to divide by the front. Right? So you can say the opposite of the back divided by the front. So you see that worked over here too. The opposite of the back, which is positive 2, divided by the front, which is 5. So I get 2/5. Okay, so that's a little shortcut for you. That's it. That's how we solve quadratic equations that do not have a constant term attached to them.